and the national work and the multiplicity of tactics that folks are really using to challenge and ultimately dismantle this system. So it's going to be juicy. So I just want to, I think, start, and Arissa touched on this, but from the very beginning, a huge piece of the bailouts for us were not just about getting our people home or providing support systems for them, which are both things that we do and prioritize, but also were as importantly about actually transforming the systems that took and brought them to those places in the first place, and the system that traps them inside of cages and in kind of surveillance states. And so from the very beginning, I think for us, we recognized, and as Mary Hooks often says, that these bailouts were kind of an iteration of abolition. So just as our ancestors went to great lengths to bring their people out of slavery, we wanted to do the same. But part of that fight for our ancestors was not just bringing individuals into freedom, but actually abolishing the systems that had caged them and had enslaved them. And so I think we similarly understand and see our mission and our mandate as not just getting our people free in the moment, but also changing the systems that allowed them to be incarcerated in the first place. And so I think the other thing that's important to say before I talk about our values is how much we recognize the lineage of these systems. And so we recognize bail and pretrial detention as a really important piece of mass incarceration. It is a way to make our people plead guilty to crimes. It is also a way to keep our folks in cages and exploit them, profit off of them. And we understand how that's connected to a long history in this country of chattel slavery, of Black codes, of Jim Crow, and how all of those things are connected, and also the adaptability of these systems. And so we, as we have talked about recently with our launch of the Black Codes of Bail, we recognize that in fact, this is a reincarnation in many ways of old systems. And it is the exploitation, the white supremacy or hegemony, the anti-Blackness is symptomatic in each of these symptoms, in each of these systems in different ways. And so I think for us, we understand that we don't just want to tweak the bail system. We don't just want to kind of see small reforms inside these systems, but we recognize that in fact, an abolition of these systems are necessary for our people to actually be free. We also recognize the adaptability of these systems. And so we see even in this moment, well, pretrial reform and bail reform is happening across the country, that the same kind of tactics, the same intentions keep springing up in those reforms. And so a few of those include, for instance, profiteering. And so we're seeing, for instance, as across the country, counties and cities and states are enacting bail reform, they also are creating carve-outs we see over and over again how kind of the drive to profit off of Black bodies and Black communities continues. A real dependency and use of what we're calling, or what they call risk assessment. And risk assessment comes, uh-oh, am I freezing for folks?
You were, but you're good.
Okay, beautiful. I can also turn off my video, so please let me know if it's a problem. We're also seeing the increased use of risk assessment tools throughout the country, which is a way of using system data. So things like how many times you've been arrested, whether or not you have a cell phone, if you have a job, if you have a past criminal record, as ways to determine if you should be eligible for bail. And so we actually are seeing the recreation of the same often racist, often classist metrics being applied to risk assessment and pretrial reform. And so the same folks, all folks are being left behind, and this time being left behind in a way that is being legitimized through science. We also are seeing an increase in preventative detention. And so we're seeing more and more of our folks being held with absolutely no access to bail, no access to a way out. And so I think for us, as we came together more than 3 years ago now to do the first bailout and to intervene in these reforms, it was really meant for us also to stop what we were seeing as kind of a co-option of the movement, that across the country, Black organizing groups, base building groups were advocating for bail reform, and then politicians and folks with power were taking those demands and formulating bail reforms in ways that didn't benefit our people, often left our people behind, and often were increasing the profits that were made off of our people's bodies. And so we saw the Mama's Day bailout as also a way to raise awareness around what we think real and meaningful pretrial justice reform looks like, which to us is not just tweaking parts of the system, but actually dismantling it, getting our people out out and ending the profiteering that's happening. And so as I think we were thinking about what this intervention meant and what our advocacy would look like and how to make sure we weren't just recreating the same system under a different name, we developed a set of values. And these are values that are constantly being evolved and reformed, and we are changing them as we also are gaining experiences inside this system. But I want to just share kind of the 9 values that we as a group came up with and are trying to make sure that all of our advocacy efforts are in alignment with. And so the first of those values is that bail reform is a necessary, but is one of many needed reforms. And so the larger goal of abolition and ending mass criminalization drives our communication strategy, our organizing, and our policy proposals. And so we really do understand bail as one piece of the puzzle that continues to cage, incarcerate, and exploit our people. Secondly, we advocate for reforms that do not re-entrench current racial disparities, class or citizenship disparities, and reject reforms that recreate current disparities, even if they are supposedly neutral or evidence-based. And so this is really a rejection of the use of risk assessment tools and other tools that under the veneer of science are often making the same distinguishings and the same decisions about our people and putting our folks in cages, right? And then thirdly, we seek the end of pretrial detention and criminalization. We believe in the need to center the history and continuing impact of anti-Blackness in pretrial reform, messaging, policy, and implementation. And so this goes back to our belief that the legacy of mass incarceration, the legacy of bail is really in chattel slavery, in Jim Crow, in Black codes, that we can see the through line in all of that, and we can see the ways these systems adapt but continue to exploit us. Fourthly, we advocate for reforms that will result in the fewest number of people incarcerated, but will not promote policies or narratives that further harm our family, who are designated as, quote, too dangerous, or that reinforce the false violent, nonviolent dichotomies. And so this is really about, we've seen over and over again that inside of our movements, inside of our advocacy work, that often folks are thrown under the bus. And often those are the folks who are the most marginalized, the most vulnerable. And so really at MBO and as part of this movement, we really are advocating for a holistic approach. So we don't want to leave any of our people behind, and we don't want to reinforce false binaries or false distinctions that actually justify the incarceration of some of our people, that we understand that comes back around to all of us, and that it's important that we actually center the folks who are most vulnerable and think of solutions and advocacy proposals that benefit them as well. Number 5 is we support policies that take the resources away from the criminal legal system, including police, prosecutors, judges, and pretrial services. And so we really are invested in what we call an invest, divest model. We think we must be divesting from these systems that were created to harm us, and investing in community-based structures that actually support our people, support their ability to thrive and to survive in these times. 6, we reject reforms that increase or continue surveillance. And so we see over and over again across the country that the solution posited to mass incarceration and to bail is to put people in ankle shackles and keep them hostage and prisoners in their own home. And so we understand that as an adaptation of mass incarceration, not a solution to it. And so reject reforms that institute surveillance, that escalate surveillance, and that legitimize or normalize surveillance. Number 7 is that we advocate for reforms that shift state resources away from punitive systems. We support policies that build community infrastructure, redistribute resources, and allow for experimentation of community alternatives to incarceration and criminalization. But we reject any policies that turn our organizations and communities into enforcers of burdensome or unnecessary legal restrictions. And so again, this is about kind of how do we divest from these systems and invest in community infrastructure. And I think we believe deeply that it's a moment of experimentation, that we've never had a system that has solved or functioned for Black communities. And so we are in a moment of trying to both create, test, and implement and experiment with what that system might look like. And so we really encourage folks to think about community-based solutions and experiment with them, and want to create policy that is open enough and spacious enough to allow us to have those experiments and to measure our success inside of them. Number 8 is that we reject reforms that create more opportunities for private companies and corporations to profit off of the criminal legal. Everything from Geo Group, which is a private prison, which over 5 years ago made a decision to invest in pretrial services, in quotes, to other corporations who are finding profit opportunities inside the pretrial system. We are absolutely against any profiteering off of our bodies, our communities, and believe deeply that there should not be a profit interest inside of this system. And then lastly, we do not believe that reforms or that the accused should have to bear the cost of reforms, and we reject user-funder reforms. And so these are reforms that are also happening across the country where folks who are accused of crimes, found guilty of no crime, are being forced to pay for things like ankle shackling, things like drug treatment, which they may not need or want, and other quote-unquote services. And so we reject the model that forces folks who are trapped and often persecuted and targeted in the system to then be responsible for the financial burden of it. And so those are some of our values. I think it's really important for us to share those because, as I said, I think we are an organization and a collective that believes deeply in being led by our values and really see these values as a litmus test for the kinds of policies that we want to advocate for and the kind of future we want to create for our people. So I want to just briefly say a bit about tactics before I pass it off to this incredible panel who's going to share kind of their in the soil, in the ground experiences with bail reform and how they've used the bailouts to bridge and to make their advocacy more impactful and powerful. But I think in terms of tactics, and so I'm going to use Ashley Henderson, who is with Highlander Center and also a member of the collective, who often says that by any means necessary, we mean all the means, right? And so when we think about how we actually want to transform and change these systems, we believe in a multiplicity of tactics. And among these, number one is around policy. And so a lot of our groups, and you'll hear this tonight, are involved in local policies, state policies, and even federal policies to end pretrial detention, to end money bail, and ultimately to reduce criminalization. And this includes everything from drafting policies, which we've done, to intervening in commissions or hearing processes, to changing the conversation inside of policy spaces to make sure that we are centering the experience of Black communities and sure we are actually moving towards an abolition of these systems and not just a reformation of them. We also do lots of work around kind of pressuring discretionary decision makers. And so this is everything from judges to DAs to pretrial service folks. How can we make an intervention in the decisions they're making that would lead less of our people to be locked up? We also have done a lot around elections, and so Scott from Color of Change and Ruben from Philly will talk a bit about the kind of interventions in DA races, and also there's been conversations about kind of judges races. So how do we make electoral interventions that result in a reduction of incarceration and also a change in the narrative around this work? We also have done or been involved in litigation, and so a lot of our groups have partnered with folks who've done litigation to really sue around the bail system, which are really openings for advocacy and for organizing and for policy change. We also have been involved in creating our own models. And so Erica Perry from BLM Memphis and Law for Black Lives will talk a bit about needs assessment and how we're kind of trying to think about how do we actually create a model that we believe in, that we can test, and that will actually change the system, change the services, change the investment choices inside of these systems. The other thing that I'll say before I pass it off is I think the bailouts have been essential to our advocacy work. Number one, because they've deeply informed our work. The folks on this call and the folks who aren't on this call who are doing this work are in the bowels of this system and are navigating what it actually looks like, feels like, and means to be inside the system. And so have really clear ideas around what has to change and can diagnose the problem in a way that many folks who may be system actors don't have any clue about the impacts of the system. And so really there's an expertise in this group and in the folks who are doing bailouts about what the actual problem is and how it's manifesting and how we can solve it. The other thing that I think the organizing of bailouts have been essential to is implementation of policy. And so we're also seeing reforms happening across the country. We're seeing policies written, but the actual impact of those policies are not what they're supposed to be. They're not impacting people the way they're supposed to. And so the bailouts, things like court watching and other tactics allow us to actually experiment and test whether or not what they're saying is being done is actually what's happening. So that was kind of a quick grounding in both our values and how we come to advocacy work. I think it's also important to say that for most of us or all of us, that we believe deeply in the power of organizing. And so just as the bailouts are a tactic, our policy work is also a tactic. And so we understand the way you sustain policy change, the way you make revolutionary change is through the power of people and the power of organizing. And so we see this as one piece of that and a stepping stone to that. But we understand that much of this is actually about how do we gather and make our people more powerful. So we're going to now spend the next about 45 minutes or so, talking to some really incredible folks across the country who've been doing advocacy work at the local, the state, and the federal level, and have been using all of the tactics I mentioned to do that. And so they're going to share a bit about their insights, where they're working, what the impact of the bailouts have been for their advocacy work, and some of the challenges that they've been facing, and some lessons that they've learned. So I'm going to start, Arissa introduce the panel, but I'm going to start with Ruben, who is from the Philly Community Bail Fund and Frontline Dads, to talk a bit about the work that's happening in Philly and how the bailouts have been part of that work. Ruben, are you ready?
Yep, I'm here, ready to go. So the bail work in Philly actually started around 2013, 2014, when we didn't even start with doing a bailout, but it was the city wanted to build a new jail. And they wanted to purchase this land to do it, and a bunch of advocates got together to prevent that from happening. And in the process, we kind of fell into bail work because we figured eliminating cash bail was a surefire way to decarcerate quickly if we can get it done, because at that time, about half of the people were being held on bail and not being able to be released. But that translated to jumping in with the first Mama's Day bailout, which gave us a tool to kind of like really, for lack of a better word, shame the system into doing better. So because it was such a prominent topic of discussion, we catapulted that into the DA's race at the time. Our old DA was out. We had an active, what do you call it? A temporary DA, and we knew the race was going to be a very contentious one. So we wanted to make sure that bail was a campaign issue. So we took careful aim at the candidates, and Krasner ended up being the person who most represented oppositions, him having been a former civil rights attorney. So we were able to leverage that relationship and leverage the power of the collective to make it a bail issue. And from that day forward, obviously Krasner stood out above the rest because he was familiar with some of the platforms, the encaged bail. He was familiar with, just our campaign, and was able to push everyone else to the left. And that strategy worked. He ended up getting elected, not solely because of that strategy, but he ended up getting elected, formed this kind of co-governance committee in which we met with them regularly around issues, and bail was one of those issues. So that's how we kind of pushed it forward, through the DA's race. We also, at the same time, coordinated with City Council, who introduced and it took a lot of push. I'm just giving you the condensed version. Introduced a resolution to end the practice of cash bail in the city. So now we have two major components, the district attorney and City Council. The mayor gave lip service verbally, but never really took any action. So our major component ended up being the FJD, the First District, who we're still kind of at war with. But overall, the tactic became one in which, like Krasner, about a little bit more than a year ago, was able to introduce his phase one of bail reform, in which he declined to request bail for 25 misdemeanor charges. And while that was significant in a certain way, the reality is we are abolitionists and we're pushing for the end of cash bail, not just incremental change. So we continue to lean on him to do more. He's been teasing a phase two for several months now. They did a big press conference about his report out on phase one a couple of months ago, but we still haven't seen phase two. So we're not personally claiming victory yet because, it's still in that very kind of superficial phase of cases in which, people have gotten R anyway. But on paper, it looks good. It looks good for his campaign as a progressive DA. But we are truly not satisfied, nor are we resting on that perceived victory. So we'll continue to just hold him accountable, not only in private meetings, but publicly, by challenging him to up the ante and move on to felonies and more severe cases, stop making the distinction between violent versus non-violent, which tends to be a tendency with them. We formed this coalition called the Coalition for a Just DA, which worked across different demographics and boundaries in the city to bring those issues to the table with the district attorney in those monthly meetings. And again, bail was always a top priority. In fact, we also had a subcommittee on bail to kind of deal with some of the nuance as we, maneuvered through the bureaucratic minutia. Right now, we're at a phase with that coalition has pretty much dissolved, and some folks are working on some other coalitions and teams. But at the heart of it, our subcommittee remains, and we continue to push the issue of bail reform through the district attorney's office. Now we have a state senator by the name of Sharif Street, who is introducing bail reform at the state level. We also have the ACLU, who's been doing court watching and has filed a lawsuit against the First Judicial District regarding bail. And we have the Philadelphia Bail Fund. There are currently two bail funds in Philadelphia. And the other bail fund has also been doing court watching, that's put out a pretty significant report. We had an article come out this week by one of the local reporters talking about how, and I don't know if any of you guys have seen it, that basically if you're black, you're going to jail in Philadelphia. And really made the distinctions about how white defendants fare much better than the accused when they're black. So we have a lot of stars lining up for us around the issue of bail. But also, just to be fair, we also have a lot of opposition. So you have the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, which is leading the charge in terms of railing against Krasner, which in terms throws any of his policies, under the bus for public scrutiny. And we also have a First Judicial District who has unchecked power and has not been willing to move an inch. In fact, they recently announced they're moving forward with their plan for a risk assessment. So I'll stop there, but I hope that gives you a rounded view of some of the work that we've been doing at the ground level around bail reform in Philadelphia.
Thank you so much, Ruben. And I forgot to mention that there's going to be time for questions at the end, because I know there was a lot of juicy stuff in there, lots of tactics. And Philly has had lots of success around this too. So I want to just invite folks, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat box and we'll hold it for the end. And then also if you have a question, jot it down so you can ask it at the end. Thank you so much, Ruben, for the presentation and for the dope work y'all are doing. I'm going to go now to Elizabeth Epps from Denver, Colorado, to talk a bit about the amazing both kind of work that's happening advocacy-wise and organizing in Denver, and just the progress that's been made and how the bailouts were part of that work.
Sure, thanks for having me. I'm Elizabeth, I'm with the Colorado Freedom Fund. I'm not sure if you can see her in the frame, but with me is Tiara Brown, who's a law student and a Black mom herself, who's going to be helping with our bailout this year. In terms of advocacy, I should stop and say that today, May 1st, is pretty special for us here at the Colorado Freedom Fund, and with thanks to y'all at NBO, because it was actually May 1st of last year that it was the day before we decided we were going to do a bailout. It was actually May 1st that we went and opened a credit union account and bought a website and started asking people in Denver for money and said, hey, give us $20,000 and let's get some Black moms out. And that worked better than expected. So a year later, thank you. So what advocacy has looked like for us in the past year has pretty much been through three prongs: through litigation, through legislation, and through local direct action, all of which you've touched on a bit. Right now, probably the most exciting part of that for us is the legislative prong. We are 30 hours away from the end of the legislative session here in Colorado. And when we set out a year ago, we said, right, a noble goal that we wanted to end wealth-based detention in Colorado and to reduce the harms to folks in Colorado while we did that. And we weren't sure what that would look like, but what has happened since is we've passed with two bail-related bills. We use the word bail reform, and one of them is bail reform. One of them I think of as really a bail abolition bill. And that one, House Bill 1225, passed. And what it does is it ends cash bail in Colorado for a whole host of offenses. So for all traffic, petty, and for misdemeanors that don't have a state corollary. And for us at the Colorado Freedom Fund, those offenses were the ones we were posting for more than any other. So it's pretty exciting to have that change. And specifically what we mean in those are, so trespass, but like park curfew violation, open container, standing on a median. We recognize that in some jurisdictions, folks aren't getting cash bail for this period, but in Colorado they still were. So now that's no longer an option. The second bill that we're still pushing hard on and have some hours to get it done is one that puts us in a really weird position. Marbury, when you were walking through those 9 values, I was thinking about, is all our work on this bill consistent with those values? And I hope so. The uncomfortable part is that one of our partners in this specific bill is the bail industry. And it's a bill that has several really important provisions. One is that there's going to be a 4-hour limit that jails have to release someone after bond is posted. Right now in Colorado, that process can take up to 3 days. And we know that a lot of harms happen. So this is after bond has been paid and posted, that people can be in jail as long as 72 hours. So getting that down to 4 hours is pretty fantastic. So that's the legislative prong. When it comes to litigation, we last summer in our Father's Day bailout were able to post a $10 bond for a young man who became the named plaintiff in a suit that our friends at the ACLU of Colorado took that ended the process in Denver of having any bond fees or booking fees or shackling fees. So that was pretty, we do think of it as revolutionary. In terms of local direct action, right? The bailouts are a part of that. And when I think about advocacy, it's really important to us to be building the political power or creating space where we can build the political power of the moms and dads who we've bonded out. So that's high level overview of the advocacy. And it's, you know how we are, dorky, especially folks with a legal background. We could talk about the actual laws all day, but yeah, that's where it started a year ago. And to be in a position where last Thursday, the governor signed into a law ending cash bail for most of the offenses we post for is hell of a start.
Yes, I'm over here giving like all the love hands and the cheers for the incredible work y'all have done. Yes, it's happening. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I think would love during the question part to hear more about kind of how y'all got to those amazing victories as well. And just the dope work that's happening in Denver. So I'm going to pass it really quickly now to Serena, who's with Southerners on New Ground and has been doing work throughout the South on bail and been using all of these tactics to do that. And so would love, Serena, just kind of a top line of the advocacy work you're doing, how the bailouts have been part of that work and some of the kind of lessons and successes.
Sure, absolutely. Hey folks, my name is Serena Sebring. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm based here in Durham, North Carolina. I work with, and I'm a member of, and regional organizing lead for Southerners on New Ground. We are an LGBTQ organizing, grassroots-based building shop that's been at it in the South for about 26 years now. Our work is multiracial. Our base is multiracial. And so I would say the first thing that I would point to around advocacy is like what it means to get all of our people pointed in the same direction and to prioritize Black leadership and Black people in our fight against anti-criminalization most broadly was how we were thinking about it before we got into working specifically to end money bail. So about 4 years ago now, we decided, this story, about 4 years ago now, we decided to start thinking about how we wanted to build local organizing advocacy campaigns. SONG, as I mentioned, is about 26 years old, and we've looked a lot of different ways over that 26 years. Many of those years were spent building a kinship network to break isolation and connect people across lines of difference across the states. Many of our folks live in rural areas, and not everybody is around the corner from an organizing meeting. So some of the work that we began thinking about, you know, all of that time is like, what does it mean to be powerful in our hometowns? And so about 4 years ago, started really wanting to build up and skill up and develop a fighting campaign arm. And we're looking for what is the issue that is widely and deeply felt amongst our people being broadly defined as not just like LGBTQ folks, but also with the understanding that what happens to our brothers and our sisters and our mamas and our aunties and the people down the street also matters to us a very great deal. So in looking at which issues we wanted to get involved in, started taking the pulse and finding that money bail was an issue that many people across our base were facing. And that looks a lot of different ways because we organize in 13 states right now. So some of the job right up front was to think about how can we move, some might say like trans-locally. So thinking about connecting different local campaigns that might look really specific based on your rural context or your urban context, but all of them intended to take a very small slice out of the needs of the beast, the prison industrial complex. And we felt like the front end of the beast was where we wanted to focus our attention. So thinking about making an intervention in pretrial incarceration and specifically the practices around money bail. So regionally, we decided to double down on this, to say, let's throw everything at it and see what we can learn. And it seems that in the last 2.5 to 3 years, when we've been actively running campaigns, we've harvested a lot of those lessons. Many of those lessons come from the first Black Mamas bailout. Shout out to Mary Hooks for a great idea. So we had a chance 3 years ago now to do our first 3 years ago, to do our first bailout. Yes, 3 years ago to do our first bailout of Black Mamas. And I too remember May 1st, that first year around, like, are we even gonna have money to get anybody out? And really feeling that the excitement and what it has meant to see the bailouts as a direct action tactic, first and foremost, that allows us to get information as local campaigns, to take up roles and learn about collective work, but also to get Black mamas out of cages, which gives us a little taste of freedom. We know that in the work to change policy, sometimes we wait a long time for a win. And so the punctuation annually of having these opportunities to get a little taste of freedom has meant a lot to us across the region over that time. So when we did this, we found out that we had a lot more people on our side than we even knew going into our work to end money bail. And we found out in the course of the first bailout really how many people we could engage in our communities who might not be primary decision makers in our advocacy campaigns, but certainly were influential on those primary targets. So we engaged like churches, other local organizations who have really come alongside and flanked. In Durham, that hasn't always looked like a formal coalition like some other folks have spoken of here. But in our case, it's kind of an informal team of the willing configuration. So we just started having a quarterly dinner with other folks who are working on anti-criminalization. And that has allowed us to sort of stay out front of the narrative within our local community of Durham, which is important because we're not the only ones working on bail reform. So to lead with a politic of abolition and to lead with a politic that is unapologetically here for Black mamas, for real, has set a tone in Durham that I think has been echoed in other places across the South and has been really important. That also has meant in other places, I think about Atlanta, where we have another sort of informal coalition of folks that we're working with. We've been able to partner with civil rights organizations, in some places with the ACLU, in other places with organizations like the Southern Center for Human Rights, and been able to bring people along. I think not everybody started with a line that matched ours politically. Not everybody could have gotten to those 9 principles that that Marbury led our call with. So our work has been very much like the outside game. If we think about advocacy like inside outside game, our lane has been very much outside, using direct action pressure tactics and informal coalitions and alliances to put pressure on our policymakers. And those policymakers have ranged across the South. Sometimes it's been the city council who has the capacity to make changes that would result in fewer people being in trial being incarcerated pre-trial. And in Durham in particular, it's judges. And that's also in a lot of communities, it's been judges who are appointed to positions and then set bail policy. So we've been working at that for some time, putting pressure on these folks, and we look forward to another bailout coming up next week to turn up the heat in even more ways, using the Mama's Day bailout framing to push our politics of abolition. But also, and then the last thing I want to shout out is really just the other piece that's been really important for us to lift up as we engage and work to free Black mamas is the diversity of families that is represented in our base. So as an LGBTQ organization, we know mamas that are not necessarily biological mamas, but might be other mamas, might be our aunties who raised us when our mama put us out, might be the house mother who has gotten the trans girls together and found housing for everybody. We know that caregivers look a lot of different ways for us and for queer Black, trans Black, and GNC Black folks across the South. And so our intention has been to really lift up not just freeing Black mamas, but also caregivers in our community, and have done so by really prioritizing and trying to locate Black trans women who might be housed according to what the state says and be in a particular kind of danger in our local jails. So I just thank you for the opportunity to talk about our work and look forward to any questions that folks might have.
Thank you so much, Serena, and just for the incredible amount of work that Song is doing throughout the South to both change the narrative and the policies. So mad love. I'm gonna go next to Scott Roberts from Color of Change to talk a bit about the advocacy work both at the federal level, but also the local campaigns that Color of Change is engaged in. Scott, are you there? Cool. So we're going to go to Erica next and then come back to Scott. So we're going to go to Erica Perry, who's with BLM Memphis and Law for Black Lives, about a model called needs assessment that we've been thinking about and scheming and dreaming on to really displace risk assessment, but also to think about how do we create models that we can implement that are really based on our experience and expertise. So I'm going to pass it to you, Erica.
So thanks so much, y'all. I'm just always so moved when I hear about the work folks are doing throughout the country, especially the South as a Southerner. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about needs assessment. And so I'll just kind of like start just with saying kind of like I think how we came to it. So from my understanding, Mark Anthony, who was an organizer out of California, was the first one to kind of coin the term to say like, actually, like, we want to challenge risk assessments of like Marbury named so many of the reasons that it's an issue. And what our people actually need are there needs to be met and needs assessment. I think many of us throughout the country, I can say especially for us in Memphis, as we were doing our own bailouts, we were like, actually like, our people are in a moment of crisis many of the times that they are encountering the criminal legal system, and what people need is their needs to be addressed. And so I'm excited to be thinking about a needs assessment model and what that could look like with organizers throughout the country who are involved in the National Bailout Collective, who are involved in their own campaigns to end money bail and pretrial detention, and practice also some alternatives. And so just a bit about the group. And so we formed, I guess it's like a forming group. We formed at the end of last May, we had a convening in LA, brought folks together who were doing bailouts, who were doing their own campaigns again to end money bail and pretrial detention around like a needs assessment model based off of the offering that Mark Anthony had given us. And so we got people together, and we decided that we wanted to continue to do work together to figure out what it looks like to implement a needs assessment model, to figure out what we mean when we talk about a needs assessment, because it can mean so many different things. And so we're a formation of organizers, lawyers, and communicators, advocates who are engaged in litigation and in money bail and pretrial detention campaigns. And so I think we find ourselves very concerned with the direction of current reforms, especially understanding that many of the reforms we see around bail are entrenched with like risk assessment, preventative detention, that actually continue to harm our families, the people we love, and the communities we care and work with. And so we said we wanted to like both address those racial disparities that continue to divest from our people, and dehumanize our people, and actually figure out what it looks like to invest in our communities, invest in our people, and bet on our people. And so, again, as I've said, in many of the jurisdictions, bail reform is coupled with pretrial risk assessment tools. And so places are passing bail reform from the local level to the state level, and they're adopting risk assessments. And so we know that sometimes they reduce pretrial detention in the short term, but again, as Marbury mentioned, they recreate and re-entrench racial disparity because the algorithms are drawn from data that's racially biased, and again, entrenched in anti-Blackness. And so we said we wanted to look at those variables. And so just some of those variables, I was talking to somebody else about it, but like educational history, criminal history, employment, housing stability, your zip code, where you live, whether or not you have a job. And so again, because of racialized policing, incarceration, underfunded schools, our people often like score, but look like a risk compared to this on this risk assessment tool. And we're like, our people actually are not risk. They have a need. Our people deserve to be invested in, but they're not a risk. And so we came together and we said we want to come up with a solution, both that addresses like risk assessments, but also addresses the huge lack of supportive services, infrastructure, and investment in our people and our communities. Because many of us who are engaged in our own campaigns have seen that there's no social or supportive services infrastructure. The first time we did a bailout in Memphis in 2017, we said we wanted to provide supportive services for our people. And so when we attempted to do that, we saw that there was nothing, no housing, little to no housing for women, for people who have children, little to no housing for people who are elderly. And then oftentimes the emergency housing looked like having to pay for it, and pay $6 or $4 a day for it. And so we saw that, and we saw there was no mental health facilities that actually treated our people with dignity and humanity. And so we saw at the state and our local like police and our local sheriff's department would rather like throw our people in a cage during their moment of mental health crises or in a moment of like a domestic violence issue than actually address the underlying issue and hold them the way they need to be treated. And so we said we wanted to come together to figure out how we create a supportive service infrastructure, both to address that need and combat risk assessments. And so so we're like any bail reform, any in the pretrial detention has to include a large scale investments in the health, housing, employment, and treatment of those people who are targeted on a consistent basis by policing, by the criminal legal system. And we also wanted to make sure that we address the root causes of criminalization. Oh my God, thank you, Daylene, because I was on it. So just really quickly talk about our objectives. We want to develop state bail legislation that incorporates a needs assessment / community investment in places where bail reform is happening, or it's likely to happen at the state level. So we're excited about the work going on in North Carolina, California, and still trying to figure out what states we focus on, but excited about the possibility of state legislation in places where it's ripe. We also want to develop a needs assessment legislation that supplements current bail system policy. And so this is places where we have local power and influence of local decision makers. And so this would be kind of a pilot program that would supplement existing or proposed legislation. And so we'd implement in this place and an assessment tool at the city or county level that would allow anyone eligible for release to complete this needs assessment and receive the necessary social services. And again, this pilot program, like I think so much of what we believe would have to include an allocation of funding as well as clear guidelines that would protect people's information. And the last kind of thing we want to do together as a body is support community-based infrastructure to meet people's needs, which I spent much of the time talking about because it's such a dire need. And so this option would focus on assessing the services and support that individuals and families impacted by the criminal legal system need, and would aim to allocate those funds to support the development of a long-term plan to actually meet those needs at the city, county, and state level. And so we look to provide a clear roadmap for services and infrastructure that's necessary, and would help organize different sectors to advocate for reallocation of resources currently spent on the criminal legal system to specific social services needs identified by community members. And so just as I wrap up, just want to like name that we have outstanding questions, because this is a project that we continue to kind of figure out and want to be rigorous with our analysis and our solutions. And so we're asking questions about what is the relationship between our objectives and risk assessments? How do we actually deal with the autonomy of local jurisdictions, pilot programs, and state law preemption? And then clarity on what we mean by community-based. Continue to ask that question, because so many people like say they're community-based, but oftentimes don't align with our values. And then how do we make sure our community-based organizations have the capacity and resources to make sure organizations can apply and receive the funding and grants to implement this program on a wide scale. So thank you, I'm excited about that. And I'll pass it back to Margaret.
Thank you so much, Erica. And as Erica mentioned, this is a group and a formation of folks who are just diving into this question. So if you are interested in being part of that formation, I will drop Erica's email address in the chat box for folks. Just let us know if you want to be part of this conversation. Thank you so much, Erica. And then last but not least, we have Scott Roberts from Color of Change to talk a bit about both the national and the local work that Color of Change is doing and the multiple tactics they are using.
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. And I'll be brief. A lot of the work that we've been doing overlaps with, what we've heard from folks who are doing this work at the local level. We've been fortunate enough to collaborate with folks like Ruben and the Philadelphia Coalition for a Just District Attorney, and able to throw down a little bit with Elizabeth and the crew out in Colorado as they've been moving the state legislative work out there, which all of this has been for us wanting to support local organizing. Also, we learn a ton everywhere we go and try to take those lessons to the next places. I guess maybe I should say a little bit about Color Change. We're the nation's largest online racial justice organization. We mobilize our members, about 1.7 million folks, on our email and text lists to push decision makers in the both political and corporate decision makers around issues impacting Black communities. We really came to this work around money bail in the wake of the death of Sandra Bland. So we spent maybe the last 3.5 years really trying to develop strategies that would prevent Black folks from being detained pretrial, from being extorted financially through the system of money bail. And when we started this work, we really laid out a few what we call change levers, which are really strategic interventions that we wanted to experiment with. Really, like not saying we had all the answers, but like things that we thought were worth experimenting with as ways to address these issues. And so the came down to really a couple core things. One was looking at the obstacles to transforming the pretrial system. And as we looked out on the work at that time, we saw a certain interest from political decision makers, elected officials, but we saw a huge opposition from the bail industry. So we focused a lot of work on driving a wedge between the bail industry and those kind of political decision makers, and in an effort to, with a focus on toxifying the industry. So it was hard for folks to be in relationship with the industry. And so for us, we wrote a report that came out around the same time as the first Mama's Bailout, that is called Selling Off Our Freedom, really dives into the bail industry and how it, it's basically a racket, it's like a monster child of like the private prison industry mixed with predatory lending, right? Like just both deeply invested in incarcerating people and in extorting people financially in their kind of at their kind of weakest moments, right? And we encourage folks to check that out. You can basically just Google Color Change Bail Report and it'll come up. But that work also for us has just kind of continues to look like, going after the industry. One of the things that I think folks can think about, and this goes into like the second bucket of work, and the intersection there, the second bucket of work for us was making bail a litmus test for people running for office, right? And so Ruben talked about the ways in which we got commitments from folks running for district attorney in Philadelphia around ending money bail or around bail reform, I think more accurately, right? And we've continued to do that work in district attorney races around the country, including, for instance, an election going on right now in Queens, New York, where we've seen a bunch of candidates really coming onto these issues. And I think what we've done is push this issue to the forefront, brought attention on to races, especially for elected offices where people tended not to pay attention, like district attorneys, and really centered bail reform as an issue. So I think there's a couple of things that you would be calling on elected officials, and not just district attorneys, right, to do. One is, support some bail reform, right? For district attorneys, for us, that means like making a commitment not to request money bail for really as many offenses as we can get. Ruben talked about the kind of incremental approach that Larry Krasner has taken in Philadelphia. And I think we're seeing that for the most part, although we're seeing more and more boldness from folks, I think as momentum builds. And I think a lot of that is due to the work in Philadelphia, which kind of set a precedent. And now you've got district attorneys who want to run this reform-oriented, wanting to kind of one-up what's happened in other places. But I think we can also make this a litmus test for people running for legislative office, for city councils, depending on what your strategy is for moving it. One of the things that we, in terms of driving that wedge, is besides like making a commitment to reforms, is like explicitly calling on people to cut ties with the industry, right? And so we have called on folks running for office not to take money from the bail bonds industry, for instance. We have been working to build out a database, especially on state legislators, in terms of who has taken that money, who hasn't. I just think it's something you can really go to people and say, look, don't take these dollars. And so at the national level, we've pushed also corporations. We worked with the SE Justice Group, which is another kind of founding group of Mama's Bailout and National Bailout, to push Google and Facebook to stop running ads for the bail bonds industry. So they've kind of cut financial ties with the industry in a way that I think just helped to toxify the industry and also just, push them out of the kind of mainstream corporate space and further marginalize them. And we've seen, the industry in, the kind of within the kind of corporate and finance worlds being kind of downgraded as like, an investment, things of that nature, which I think is really important. Right now, we're actively working because some of these companies are owned by venture capital funds pushing, like for instance, the Washington State Pension Fund to try to divest their investments in Endeavor Capital, which owns the largest bail bonds companies in California and is actively trying to, through a ballot initiative, overturn reforms that have happened out there. So I really encourage folks, like even at the local level, you can look at your local bail bonds industry rights, find out what their kind of worst, think about what their worst practices are, take that to local officials, say, you know, you can't be affiliated, associated with these folks. Yeah, so I think that, you know, that's been really productive. Let's see, Marbury shared the link to the report in the chat. Thank you for that. Also want to flag just at the national level, I think there's a really interesting thing going on, right? Like where we've got two of the leading candidates for the Democratic nomination for the presidency have bail reform legislation before Congress, have introduced bail legislation in Congress, and that's Senator Kamala Harris and Senator Bernie Sanders. They have two separate bills. Folks from the National Bailout Collective and other organizations gave input on both of those. I think we had a lot more success with the Sanders bill. Both bills initially had risk assessments built in as kind of a requirement for states to get funding to end money bail. And we were, I think partly because of the learning experience of dealing with the Harris bill, which came first, able to get that stuff out of the Sanders bill. I don't even know if I'm supposed to say this, but word on the street is this coming out of the Harris bill as well. So we're excited about the possibility of that. At least we'll see it, you know, we'll believe it when we see it, obviously, as with kind of all those promises from politicians. But I would say that there's an opportunity to take this kind of litmus test strategy that we've had at the local level with folks like district attorneys and to an extent sheriffs in a place like Durham, or judges in a place like Houston, where folks have used that strategy as well. But to take that litmus strategy to the national level, right, and make it really clear to folks trying to win, especially Black votes in the Democratic primary, that like you have to be aligned with not just with bail reform, with our principles around bail reform. And I think, you know, there's like there's an opportunity, I think, at the local level. These folks may be coming to your community, right? Some of us are in critical places for these elections, and like, how do we make those interventions? How do we show up at forums, meetings, community outreach stuff that they're doing, and raise these issues, even with the folks trying to run for president? I think is actually critical. And then I just want to do a quick plug. I know my time is up, so let me just quick plug that for folks who are looking at tools for organizing around bail reform, pretrial detention reform in your local communities, Color Change, we have a online tool for folks who want to build petitions that then we can then share with folks on our list in your local community. It's called organize4.org. That's FOR, 4, not the number. I'll throw it in the chat as soon as I wrap up here. But if folks want to do that, and then feel free to reach out to me and flag those if you do upload something, or if you have questions about it, and how we can collaborate. But just want to offer that tool and resource for folks who are really looking to amplify the campaign work that you're doing at the local level. Appreciate y'all. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Scott. So I'm excited about this. We're doing a lightning round, but I want to invite folks while the panelists answer these questions in a minute or less, to put any questions that y'all have, any work you guys are doing in the question box. And so it's in the middle on the kind of bottom, whatever this thing is called, tab. it's the middle Q&A box. So if you have any questions, thoughts, you want to reflect on anything, you want more resources, let us know, holler. This is a really rich panel to have a conversation with. So I'm going to just ask y'all to answer in a minute or less a few questions. The first of which is, what are some of the most valuable lessons that you have learned, both in the bail advocacy work and in the bailouts as it pertains to advocacy? And whoever wants to go can go. I have an alarm. I'll give like hand signals.
I'll go. In terms of biggest lessons, a couple of them. One is, I'm sorry to sound corny, but is dream big. When it comes to policy things, while I'm really excited that our first bill passed unanimously, so bipartisan, and that gives us an opportunity, right, to position ourselves as thought leaders on this, it also to me suggests that we didn't ask for enough. Right, and so walking a line there, right? It's great to have one, but we should have, you know, my dream bill is going to have some opposition. My dream bill, we're going to pass it, but it's not going to come through unanimous. I would also say, I wish I had realized earlier in this process, in terms of being a public advocate, to get comfortable with using our words and our terms, even sometimes in their spaces. So my card now says I'm an abolitionist, and when I pass, instead of just saying Elizabeth Epps JD, and when I pass that card onto the Senate floor, again and again, a legislator has come out to speak with me and has said, you're a what, right? And it's opened up a chance for a conversation that that has worked well on both sides of the aisle. So, you know, dream big, as cheesy as that sounds, and don't feel the need to put things into the terms of the oppressors, right? I'm also a lawyer, but I don't have to lead with that in these spaces.
Look at you at 1 minute, exactly. Thank you so much, that was brilliant. Who wants to go next?
Okay, I'll go.
I was like, I'm about to call on Serena so you could feel the vibes.
Okay, I think our first lesson was that we got to do a whole lot more than just end money bail. One of the first and most powerful lessons of the bailouts was just the bustedness of our social safety nets. And folks have lifted that up just in terms of like what it looks like to bail people out and then find that there's no transitional housing available, or that the only free drug treatment that's available in your county comes in the jail. So things like, drug addiction and recovery services, homelessness services, as well as mental health care are all absolutely essential parts of what it means to end money bail and actually keep people out of cages.
Bam. Thank you, Serena. I'm going to just call on people because the whole volunteer thing wasn't going so well. Ruben?
Now I feel picked on. I think one of the things that I think Serena just mentioned was the cash bail is not, the ending cash bail is not the end all be all. I think for us, we had to look at a culture shift in Philadelphia. And that means a lot of political education, both for elected officials and lay people, because we're in a tough fight with this, with these judges who just feel that they're just omnipotent and they don't have to answer to anybody. They don't have to be accountable to anyone. So for us, to get people to give a damn is very difficult. Like if it doesn't directly affect them, and if you ask me, it affects everyone. They just don't recognize it. But like creating this culture shift where we had to really engage folks at the ground level, really literally A, B, C, D, E, with criminal justice reform, particularly around bail. That includes city council, that includes the mayor, that includes the pastors, because most people just don't understand. Most people don't have any inclination of how the bail system works or what arraignment is or any of those things. And even when you talk to people now around the city, half of them believe, and if you talk to people outside the city especially, most of them believe that, hey, Philly already in the cash bail, right? And, it's just this really hard battle that we have to fight to create this culture shift where we move from Philly has traditionally been a kind of lock them up and throw away the key kind of approach and tough on crime kind of approach to really getting people to humanize those folks who've been accused of committing a crime. And that's where we can begin to have other conversations at. So that's a lesson that was hard fought and learned probably early on. I heard the mention of needs assessment versus risk assessment. And there was a point in time when we started this that we had hard fought battles within our own, little circles of really getting people to understand what a needs assessment meant and what it looked like. Yeah. So there's been a lot of those kind of things that have happened along the way where the culture shift, the level of engagement, removing the apathy is just as important as getting the actual changes that we're fighting for. So that's what I'll offer.
Thank you, Ruben. I'm going to go to Erica next.
Yeah, I think everything that's been said. I think for us, there's been like this so many people don't understand what we mean by bail. So having to convey that, and we continue to like try to help people understand that. I think also what we know is that, like, as Serena said earlier, is that like for people who are like actually like experiencing the criminal legal system on an ongoing basis, like ending money and bail and pretrial detention really resonates in a really beautiful way. And I think, and the other lesson for us is that bail, I think we knew this, we just create so many entry points into totally like divesting from this system. And so it touches on policing, it touches on the lack of supportive services infrastructure, it touches on the criminal legal system, like the trial process. And so because it touches on so much, we're able to like invite people into different parts of it, which can be like, I think slightly daunting, but also creates, I think, so many opportunities. And the last portion was just, Mark Anthony brought this up yesterday when we talked about supportive services, was just that policymakers are really interested in like saving money. And so we say, oh, ending pretrial detention saves us money. And so we have to push them on the conversation around like actually like taking that money and investing in our communities. And it's something we're like kind of grappling with here with our like mayor and county commission. So I think that's a big lesson.
Beautiful. Thank you, Erica. And Scott?
Yeah, I think from just to give one takeaway, is lots of lessons learned. Having a kind of multi-stakeholder and decision-maker approach. I think we have had we at Color Change, I think a lot of groups around the country put a focus on district attorneys as an office that was like not really contested, where we saw a lot of opportunity to intervene. And as we've learned and had success in that area where DAs are more and more willing to get more aligned with our agenda, if not all the way aligned, we've seen the other stakeholders in the process, particularly judges, disrupting the ability to perform, right? So I would just think broadly in terms of who you're engaging, whether it's an electoral strategy or advocacy strategy for people who are already in these positions, and how we can build momentum and consensus with folks across those positions, anticipating that type of opposition will come if we're not bringing folks along together. So I'll stop there.
Beautiful. Thank y'all. So I want to just give folks a chance who are listening to ask any questions, any curiosities that folks might have, either in the chat box or the Q&A box, before I go into the last lightning round. I feel like there should be Jeopardy music now. Okay, so I'm gonna go for it, but we have about 15 minutes left and this should take about 5 minutes. So I wanna encourage folks, if you have questions, things you wanna follow up on, please do put it in the Q&A box. So the last question for the lightning round is, what are the biggest threats you're facing in terms of ending money bail, in terms of ending pretrial detention, in terms of this advocacy work, and what are some ways you're addressing them? And let's go backwards. So let's start with Scott.
You got me. All right. I think I just talked a little bit about like, the challenge running with the different actors in the court system, and how, you may get one person on board and still have to deal with others. I think also there's, this has been said, but I do think there's a big kind of basically storytelling and narrative intervention that we have to make around these kind of divisions around low-level offenses or non-violent offenses, right? Like, to really end pretrial detention, we have to, one, bring everybody, like, include everybody. And I think part of that means that, like, we can't just talk about the harm that this has on people who are quote unquote undeserving. But I think the piece that Serena brought up earlier around what are the alternatives and in terms of how we approach people in crisis, and like how we start talking about how we want people to be treated is really critical. Otherwise, we just get these kind of carve outs where it's like, folks who are who don't make us feel unsafe or feel less dangerous are more worthy of this. And I think, in some ways, if we allow ourselves to just focus on those folks, then the system can re-entrench itself, right? And that's not to. I think we've all been doing that, right? Like, I'm not necessarily against like incrementalism, but I think we want incrementalism that is building momentum towards really transformative change. And so while we might, for instance, move a bill in Colorado that like abolishes money bail for a whole set of people, thousands of people who will no longer be subjected to it, that's huge to me. But the way that we talk about it when we're doing it, right, should be setting us up for the next move. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, those were nuggets. Thank you so much, Scott. So next, Erica.
Yeah, I think for me, two things come up. One is like the risk assessment tools, which we talked about throughout this conversation, and like we've been trying to address that through like needs assessment. I think the other piece when I think about risk assessments and just like the broader like advocacy work is like for me what feels like a challenge or opportunity around doing both base building work and policy work and trying to make sure we do those at the same time. And that can be I think a bit difficult when we think about the urgency of needing to like not even lead proactive like legislation, but to combat like certain like issues and look at opportunities, but also wanting to make sure that we're bringing our base along and that like what we do is has been informed, infused, and like led by our base. And so I think like that has been a challenge that I've seen and like experienced.
Thank you so much, Erica. Shout out to Movement Lawyering and all the dope work you're doing to bridge those things. I'm going to pass it to Ruben next.
Yeah, I'll say apathy and burnout. Apathy for the people who don't really engage. Like there's Philly has a very poor voter turnout, so people aren't as engaged in the political process. They think they're powerless against these judges and these other folks. And then burnout for the folks who are engaged, like, they're called on to do a lot. It's really a handful of folks. And, somebody mentioned the word daunting or overwhelming. It can be very overwhelming to face this mountain of injustice, this machinery of oppression that you're trying to fight against. And, you don't have a whole lot of soldiers on the battlefield. So I think that those two things go hand in hand. I also think public perception is a thing that we have to fight against. Most of the time we're spoon-fed sound bites through the news media, and people are doing independent research to really see what's going on with criminal justice reform or what power they have, or any of those things. So I think that's a significant part of this battle. Just, the information that people are getting, and it lacks a punch. So it creates a perspective that, that's not good, that doesn't invite people in. So, but mostly apathy and burnout are the two things I say are major threats. But I also would add just the political maneuverings of folks who are in office, the FOP, and I'll keep coming back to the judges who literally have unchecked power, and that's the shame of it.
Thank you for that, Ruben. And just for folks, there's a question in the chat box, if folks want to look at it and try and answer it. And then I'm going to go next to Serena.
Hey, that was a good transition. Ruben, you were talking about some of the unchecked power of the judges. And so here in Durham, that's like central in our minds. We were recently handed a new bail policy by our target judges that was like not even really a reform in any sense of the word. So their appointment to these positions that set bail policy means that they're really insulated. So one of the challenges and threats to our work here locally is just like how to move people who are only on this electoral cycle every couple years when we have people who urgently need to get out of cages. So that's one big challenge for us locally here in Durham. And then I think another one for us more broadly as Song is just that we find we've been on this campaign trail for 3 years now, and so we have developed language like risk assessment and needs assessment, and have some of us who have been organizing a pretty clear vocabulary and way of understanding the system, and people who want to enter the work don't always share that. So it's like how to balance a campaign that's like a train moving down a track with welcoming people on and introducing folks to issues that they might not come in the room already knowing about. So just being a posture of invitation, I think, is our calling and always our biggest challenge.
Thank you for that and the poetry. I'm going to give it to Elizabeth to close us out.
As far as threats and how we're combating them, I certainly echo what other folks have said. If I were to sort of, really, I mean, the threat is white supremacy is the thing we're fighting against. In the most pressing sense recently, I guess it's just on my mind because it's been unexpected, has been the threat of opposition from would-be allies, and particularly system actors who I would have otherwise anticipated would be on our side. In some cases, public defenders, just folks who their bent is, y'all know what I'm saying, right? We know the judges are against us. We know the bail industry is against us. But in Colorado, the narrative of bail reform, since it's been a thing, has been dictated by system actors who I've realized really they share a common goal, the DAs and the PDs, of keeping their power centralized. So how we've been combating it in a lot of ways has been citizen lobbying. We were able to get one of the most conservative DAs in the Senate to vote our way on our bill, and it had to do with a lot of just having his constituents bird dog him, but also bringing the conversations public. So while I might not be as polished as some of the legislators or in some ways, by forcing them to have these conversations with us in public, it eliminates their ability to make these decisions in private. And so that's been how we've been combating it, and also not writing folks off, right? Just because they are an enemy, but it has been fascinating to see the threats to some folks who I'm like, but you're supposed to be on my side. So the best way we've been able to combat it has been, sunlight being a good disinfectant has been working.
Thank you so much for that. So that is all lightning round questions. Thank you all for playing. I want to just see if there are any questions before we close out. I see, James, you have a question around an amount of money. So curious what jurisdiction you're in, and I think someone from the National Bailout can help answer that question. But any other questions for the folks on the panel about policy or advocacy or anything? Beautiful. Well, if not, then I'll pass it back to Arissa to close us out. Want to briefly mention two kind of upcoming things. So one, of course, are the amazing bailouts that are happening in a week, and we're still fundraising and trying to really support that work and make it huge and beautiful. We also, this week, have been releasing what we're calling the Black Codes of Bail, which is another Mary Hooks-ism, but just thinking about what it means to connect the Black Codes, which were a series of laws enacted across the South and the North in the aftermath of the Civil War that essentially kept slavery in place via other legal means. So everything from curfew laws to laws around people being able to congregate in public, to laws about if you can drink if you're a Black person, and the ways we're seeing the same kinds of laws in pretrial policies and practices. So many of our folks are on curfews, many of folks are paying for their own electronic shackles and can't stay at their jobs. Folks are being limited in terms of where they can go and when. We're also seeing things like in Atlanta, 2-year waiting periods before folks even find out if their trial is going to move forward, and so they're in a constant state of limbo. And so we're seeing the same kinds of codes, the same kinds of policies and practices to control communities and bodies that we saw in the aftermath of the Civil War, and want to really make those connections. And so check out our website at nationalbailout.org. We're dropping one a day, and so it culminates on Friday. And then also, as Arissa mentioned, we have a big report coming out in August that will kind of detail the work of the bailouts, detail the advocacy work, and detail the insights and lessons that we've learned collectively to really pass those on to be tools for the work that y'all are doing. So I will close out with that and pass it to Arissa to give some kind of previews for the next upcoming webinars and for Mama's Day.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marbre, for holding us through and all the information that you shared and wisdoms. And thank you to our lovely, lovely panelists, Serena Sebring of Southerners on the Ground, Erica Perry from BLM Memphis and Law for Black Lives, Ruben Jones from Frontline Dads, the Philly Community Bail Fund, Elizabeth Epps from Colorado Freedom Fund, and Scott Roberts from Color of Change. And also shout out to our lovely operations coordinator, Delane Powerful, for like holding us down and doing all the things in the background. So again, this was our advocacy webinar. This is part of our weekly webinar series hosted by the National Bailout Collective. Next week, we will be having a webinar to troubleshoot. As some folks mentioned, next week we will start bailing out Black mamas, y'all. So get ready and excited to free Black mamas. So with that, we will be having a webinar to troubleshoot. So same place, same time. Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. You can get with us and share out your local bailouts, like what hasn't been working. As we shared at the beginning, we are a collective of some magic makers, cultural workers, lawyers, organizers who have had experience in doing this for the past 3 years. So hope to be able to support you all. And also, as Serena so lovely said, be in the posture of invitation. So we want to make sure that we're doing that. And with that, do want to also quickly just speak to James' question around that. I see Marbre has responded, which question was just like, is $16.50 enough to bail folks out? And really, really invite you to look at your local jurisdictions, depending on where you are. I see you in Florida. Folks have bail schedules, people have average bail amounts. We can definitely connect with you. I'll put my email in the chat box, as well as the lanes, but we have a whole feasibility section in our Until Freedom Comes toolkit, which we can also link y'all to, but really walking through just like, it depends on where you are. In Florida, that may be able to bail someone out, but it literally just depends on bail schedules and how your jurisdictions work, but we can definitely support you in that. So we'll put my email, which is arissa@nationalbailout.org, in the chat box. And what else was I going to say? Oh, yes, we are still fundraising. So definitely, if you want to learn more or support our work, you can go to nationalbailout.org. And we will be in touch with notes and next steps moving forward. That is all that I have. Thank you for joining us. And we are excited to be in this work.
Thank you, Arissa.
Bye, y'all. Thank y'all.
Bye-bye, everybody.